and welcome to rather obviously titled segment, a segment that's specially designed to showcase the backstories of individuals who have made an impact. During this hour, we will delve into a conversation around stories that need to be told of modern day icons. Luminary Learning Solutions crafted this segment so you, our audience, can be inspired to truly thrive. I'm Anton Thalan, the Chief Evangelist and co-host this hour. And joining me is the founder and destiny architect of High Five Consultancy, Vidusha Nathavitarana, the host for this afternoon. And together, we will take you through an hour of free-flowing discussion. For today's segment on In Conversation With, it is our pleasure and an honor to introduce Andy Lopata, an author, a professional speaker, and a professional relationship strategist. Andy has worked globally with clients including PayPal, GlaxoSmithKline, and Brother, to name a few. He has written 4 books on networking and often been quoted in the media, including the Sunday Times, the Financial Times, and in fact, the Financial Times called Andy one of Europe's leading business networking strategists. And both Forbes.com and The Independent called him a true master of networking. Andy was the managing director of leading UK business network, Business Referral Exchange, for 8 years before establishing his speaking and training business in 2007. A hardcore supporter of Charlton Athletics, he enjoys cooking, hiking, and theatre. Oh, and not to mention the various failed attempts at sport. On that note, welcome to the segment, Andy. We are pleased to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Anton. What a welcome, these various failed attempts at sport. Yes, and they were desperate failures as well.
Just, well, thank you for accepting the invite and for joining us, Andy. And before we kind of dive into your key area of networking and relationship building, I would like you to take us through who Andy was before getting into this position. I noticed that you had worked in media world, you had worked in a number of organizations. Take us through that story. What got you here?
Well, I mean, I've been involved in the field of networking and professional relationships for over 20 years now. So everything else seems like another lifetime ago. But after I left university, throughout my 20s, I jumped from job to job, never really settled. I was a civil servant for 4 years. I travelled the world. I backpacked for 15 months. And while I backpacked, I worked in a range of jobs across Australia and South Africa, including being a runner on the film sets in Cape Town, which is probably my favourite. When I got back, as you mentioned, I got involved in working in media, sound engineering, live radio interviews, working with very early iteration of Photoshop, to create pictures for the press of the events that our agency was behind, before getting involved in the worlds of first of all publishing, in publishing sales, and ended up as project manager for a project called the Finest Golf Clubs of the World. So, my job was to approach the top golf clubs all around the world and get them to join an alliance effectively, where these very exclusive clubs would allow members from other clubs to play on their courses, before going for the less glamorous world of car parking. And it was from there that I was rescued and entered the world of networking back in 1999.
Wow. Sorry, Vidusha, go ahead.
No, I was very curious, just to kind of reverse back. Why did you do so many things?
Because I never found really what I wanted to do. when I applied for university, I came from a family where I was going to be an accountant or a lawyer. And I applied for accountancy at university and I was accepted. And then I worked 2 summers while I finished school, 2 summer jobs in accountancy firms. And I realized it's not what I wanted to do. So I went and studied politics because I had an interest in politics, but it wasn't really a vocational degree. My big hobby outside sport was music, and I got the opportunity to work for a record company, and then I discovered it was better to keep it as a hobby. Just it wasn't an environment that was conducive to me, and from then it just became reactive, if you like. When I left that, I needed a job, and I went to the job centre and I found one. That was the civil service. I applied for promotions because I was told on my first day that I was below my appropriate grade. And being ambitious, I immediately started looking for the next role. After 4 years, I just wasn't well. It wasn't the environment for me. A lot of my friends backpacked. My ex-girlfriend moved back to Australia, and that was really the spark for me to just throw it all in and go. And then when I came back for my sister's wedding and the European Football Championships in 1996, not necessarily in that order. My sister got me a job where she worked, and then from there it was an offer here, an offer there. There was no career plan. I didn't find my slot, where I was comfortable until my dad had co-founded networking groups, and he invited me to come and help him when I quit my last job. And I was going to become a freelance writer, and I'd worked out by then I couldn't work for other people. So I was going to become a freelance writer, and he said, come and help us. And that was really the turning point.
What happened from there? Let's move into that and take it on from there before I get into the questions on networking itself.
Yeah, sure. So my dad had co-founded this business network with his business partner. I came in after 6 months to ideally, the idea was to help them while I found writing commissions, but it became full-time very quickly. And we grew that. When I joined, there were 4 groups. We grew that into a national business, over 100 groups, I think about 125 groups around the UK when my father and I sold to our partner. And we also opened in Barcelona. We built a very well-known brand in the UK over those 8 years. But it got to the point where I was running a franchise and I wasn't enjoying that. And I don't think we got the franchising right either. And it got to the point where I could see that we were doomed to not succeed. The model just wasn't going to work in the long term as the market changed, and we weren't set up to adapt. And ultimately, I wasn't enjoying it in the way the last year or 2 there, I wasn't getting the pleasure out of it that I was before. And I was, by then, I'd written my first book. In fact, I'd written my first 2 books by that stage. I'd been introduced to the world of professional speaking. I'd been paid well for presentations, and it got to the stage where I wanted to do that full time. So it took a year to convince my father to exit with me, but we did that in 2007, and then we had one failed attempt at an online network way before the market was ready. But my heart was never in that anyway. And then since 2008, really have focused on delivering training, speaking and mentoring on networking and professional relationships.
Just to kind of rewind the clock a little bit, because
Sure.
Whenever people go through this many changes, I often find that whatever you've done in the past, and lots of people think that you shouldn't shift careers all the time because it's not good for you, and so on and so forth. And I've always looked at people who have done it and then settled into something, and then made a huge success out of it. And I find a common thread, and I just want to find out whether that's true of you as well, which is all of what you did in the past, irrespective of whether you liked it or not, comes in useful for what you do right now? And does that feed you with insights that probably others just don't have?
Yes, I don't know about insights that others don't have. I think I wouldn't phrase it like that, for fear of appearing arrogant, I guess. I think everyone has a different blend of ingredients that makes up their knowledge and their expertise wherever they are in their career. And I certainly have mine. And you can go back to before my working life. You know, in my teenage years and probably earlier, I went to drama school after school, and I did exams up to bronze medal at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. I auditioned for the Royal Shakespeare Company when I was in my teens. And I really, until I was 16, when I discovered girls and football, you know, I really threw myself into drama. And there's no doubt that that helps with, you know, my job now as a speaker, as a presenter. You know, my ex-girlfriend, my first, you know, really serious girlfriend, is an actress, and we sort of laughed about how, you know, the audiences that I had gone on and presented one-man shows effectively to, you know, when I hadn't followed that route. So I think that's definitely helped me. And yes, I think age has given me an ability to look back at who I was in those times and learn from the mistakes that I made, and there were a lot, and those mistakes inform what I share with people now, and also some of the things that I got right, often inadvertently. But I use examples from that decade in my 20s. I use examples from my, you know, how I engage with people in the civil service, about how we stayed in touch with people when I backpacked and things like that. I use those examples now when I'm talking about professional relationships. So they are the ingredients in my journey, but everyone has them.
No, I agree. And you're being very modest because, no, genuinely, I meant that because, see, when you speak, and especially when you consult, being able to relate to a vast majority of people who might come from very, very different backgrounds truly help. And most who would have had a linear um, career trajectory, and this is not to look down on anyone in any form. Of course, they do have their own ingredients, and they certainly have a set of skills that we wouldn't have because we've moved around. But I've often found that the ability to relate, and when you say something, and when you recite a story, and when you relate to something, the instantaneous reaction and that little aha moment and that penny dropping happens because you connect with the person who's speaking. And that often is the case when you have a multiple or a diversity of experiences. But just one more before I pass on to Anton, because he's waiting there impatiently to ask the question. But just to probe a little on that time frame before you um, moved into your vocation, was there at any point that you kind of wanted to be a speaker, an author, and a consultant? Did that kind of flash up, or was it purely by chance that you kind of got into it?
Just quickly on your previous point, one of the things that I talk about a lot is the importance of cognitive diversity. In other words, having a network of people from a range of backgrounds, a range of expertise, a range of different perspectives to give you more fully formed answers to the challenges you're facing. So I think that very much goes to the point that you said. In terms of the second question about what I wanted to do, the only previous connection to what I do now is when I was in the civil service. I think the moments I enjoyed the most, particularly my second civil service job, was when I went on training events. And there was a spell before I went backpacking where I thought I would like to get into the training side of the civil service. And then I went backpacking and I completely forgot about that. And then many years later, I was training and realized that I'd made that transition anyway, you know, unconsciously. So certainly that came up. As I referenced before, I think the speaking reflects back to my acting days very much. But the idea of being a speaker or author it's not really run of the mill, is it? It's not something that most people talk about, you know, with their friends and family as a career option. It's something I came across by chance, really.
Sorry, Andy. Right.
That's okay.
No, just take. I mean, interesting that you've had a beautiful career, right? It has definitely had its shares of ups and downs. I want to sort of go back. So you've got your speaking assignment or speaking piece at one point, but can you take us back to your first book and how that came about, and why did you get into that? And then I will bring you back into your speaking, and I do have a few more questions on that.
Sure. I actually, my first two books crossed over, really. So I think I started my second book before I started my first. So the second book was And Death Came Third. And that came about because Peter Roper, who's the person who got me into speaking as a profession, Peter and I worked out that we delivered a joint presentation called And Death Came Third. And Peter talked about the how to speak in public, and I talked about how to network. And these were two of the biggest fears in a New York Times survey. They said, what are you most frightened of? And death came third. Top fear was walking into a room full of strangers, and the number two was speaking in public. So we addressed those top two fears in our presentations, and they were very well received. So we did these around the country quite a few times, and actually I remember exactly where I was when I said it. We were crossing the Euston Road in London, and I said, there's a book here, and we started working on that book. That took about 2 years. In the meantime, I had met some other speakers. I'd joined the Professional Speaking Association a year or so before, and I'd met a couple of other speakers, and one of them approached two of us, and he said, I'd like us to write a book together, which became Building a Business on Bacon and Eggs, which was about running business breakfast meetings. And that was a much faster project than And Death Came Third. So it actually overtook it in terms of publication. So in the first case, which became the second, it was me recognizing that two speeches could translate into a book. It turned out that a speech gives you a few pages. There's a lot more that needs to go into a book. And then the first book, which was actually the second to come up, was someone approaching me.
Sorry. So on that, when you did mention about the first and the second book, and you did touch on networking, and I have a question that I must ask, because I read somewhere that you're also known as the king of networking, amongst other titles that you get. But when it comes to networking, Andy, I mean, most people always think, and the popular belief is that networking is all about sales, right? I mean, you network with someone to sell your service, sell your product, and that's the only reason people choose to network. But I understand you have a completely different view to that. Can you take us through that?
Yeah, of course. I mean, what you've just described is a complete fallacy, but it's an oft misconceived one. If you try and sell to people through networking, your network will shrink because people don't like being sold to. And they certainly don't go to networking events, engage with LinkedIn, accept introductions to be sold to. So using networks to sell is a short-term strategy that's just not sustainable. You sell through your network, not to your network. You sell through the room, not to the room. And what that means is you build relationships. And that's why I focus much more now on the term professional relationships than I do on the word networking, precisely because of that perception of networking that you've just shared. But if you build relationships with people, you may build relationships with people who are your prospects and can become your clients. And if you build a strong relationship with them, if they need what you offer and they trust you and they understand what you offer, then why would they go anywhere else? But in the meantime, they could be referring you to 4 or 5 different people. So building the relationships, getting people to really understand what you do and want to support you will lead to people buying from you, but equally it will lead to a host of other benefits as well.
Can I just quickly interject there, because I think death came third is an interesting way of putting it. And the fear is very, very real. And I think a lot depends on, or a lot of people perceive it to be this. A lot of people think that building relationships or networking is down to whether you're introverted or extroverted. And I really had to ask you that question. Is it down to that? Will it come instinctively if you're more extroverted?
No, again, it's another common fallacy that extroverts are better networkers. Extroverts are more comfortable in a formal networking environment. Doesn't make them better networkers. The advantage that extroverts have is that they will find it more comfortable walking into a room full of strangers. They will find it more comfortable approaching people and initiating a conversation. The disadvantage they have is that conversation will often be about them. And you know, Dale Carnegie said the sweetest sound to any man is the sound of his own name. And so when we hog the limelight and talk about ourselves the whole time, we're actually turning people away. That's what makes introverts good networkers, because an introvert will listen. An introvert will really take things on board and analyze them, and then will make much more meaningful contributions to the discussion. So let's move the idea of networking away from a formal event and into relationship building. That can suit an introvert because they don't need to go to a big event with lots of people, but they can have coffees with people, they can have quiet conversations. It's where the internet was born, you know, with introverts speaking to each other on message boards, networking. That's what they were doing, but they were hiding behind their keyboards. But I think, you know, I'm not saying one is better than the other. Like many of these things, you want certain introverted qualities and certain extroverted qualities, just as the majority of us are probably ambiverts, where we have elements of introvert preferences and elements of extrovert tendencies. So what you really want is the best of each world. The confidence to approach people, the confidence to talk about yourself and ask for help when it's appropriate, but also the humility and the ability to be quiet, to listen and to ask interesting questions and contribute appropriately.
How do you get to that point though? Because a lot of people shy away from making that first move and does lack the confidence. And even if you were more extroverted than introverted, and most people misunderstand extroversion and introversion into being sociable, isn't it? I mean, you can be an introvert but very sociable, and that helps. But how do you get someone who's very deeply introverted, who doesn't necessarily want to make that first move? How do you make that person confident enough to actually make that first step? Is that something that you can be coached into, or is it something that you got to learn by yourself, or how does that work?
There's no harm in having support on the journey. You know, at some point you can't have someone do the work for you. So at some point you're going to have to do things that are uncomfortable by their very nature, but you can have people who can coach or mentor you through that and hold you accountable. So, for example, in Death Came Third, I compare it to getting into a hot bath. You don't just jump in, you ease your way in. So what you might do, and we're talking about formal events here, you might go to an event and say, as long as I talk to one new person, that's progress. And then do that for a couple of events and say, right, now I need to talk to 3 new people, and gradually build it up that way, build up your confidence. So there are a lot of little things you can do like that. Exactly the same, it doesn't have to be events. It can be, I need to pick up the phone. I need to pick up the phone to someone today that I don't talk to regularly, or I wouldn't approach otherwise. And just set yourself little micro goals, micro targets that are very achievable, but then you can progress into larger and larger objectives. But of course you can have support on that in that process and on that journey. But I think it's like anything, the more you do it, the more comfortable you will become. It doesn't mean, if it's your natural tendency to find it uncomfortable, it doesn't mean that goes away. I've actually become more introverted as I've got older, probably because of the amount of networking events and conversations I've had over the years. So when I go into that formal environment, I often have to force myself, but I know what I need to do when I get there. And once I'm, again, it's like that bath theory. Once I'm in it, I'm comfortable. It's actually just getting into it that makes that is difficult, and I have to really focus on. A good analogy is to public speaking, because the first time you stand up on stage, if you're scared of public speaking, you can find your mouth dries up and the words dry up. And I've seen people stand there and open their mouth and nothing come out. But I've seen the same people months down the line speak with authority and captivate a room because they're doing it regularly. And that doesn't mean they're any less nervous. They're probably less nervous, but it doesn't mean they're not nervous. But it means they've become more comfortable and more used to doing it. And by doing that, they've been able to overcome the fear and find a balance. It doesn't mean that the nerves have gone away. I speak publicly for a living, but I can tell you I still get nervous. And particularly at big conferences, I will still face quite a severe, sometimes physical reaction to the fear before I speak. But I've been through it before, and I know to expect it, and I know how to handle it.
It's interesting that you brought that analogy between speaking and networking, because for sure the fears are very, very similar. But thankfully, I guess at least when you're networking or in a forum of that nature, you're not always expected to speak. You can always keep shush if you wanted to, but when you're speaking, even that is not a possibility, isn't it? So it's great that you brought that analogy, because I guess if you're in that zone and you walk into that room and it's a group of people that you've never met, it's as bad as being under the spotlight in front of the mic, and you just freeze. Now, when that happens and you've been through that many, many times, then you know what to do. But on those first few occasions when it does happen, are there a quick set of tips what you can do to just overcome that? And you want to do it, so you've gone into that big forum and everyone's having a good time and you just freeze. What do you do then?
Well, if I was in that position where I freeze and I can't approach anyone, I would step away from the room and I would remind myself why I'm there and what I'm trying to achieve. The other thing that I would do in advance is I would just do a little very simple exercise that reinforces why people would want to talk to me and overcome some of the fears of rejection that hold us back. So it's an exercise that I share in a lot of my workshops and can be very powerful. And you list 5 things about you that mean that your clients want to pay you or your employer wants to pay your salary. In other words, what are the qualities you bring to what you do? And when you look at those qualities, you remind yourself, well, why wouldn't anyone want to talk to me? Look at the value I bring. And then you write down a list of 5 reasons that make you good company on a date within reason. But you look at that list before you go back in and you say, why wouldn't anyone enjoy my company? So it's that self-reinforcement, that just to remind yourself that you are, to use a famous advertising strapline, you are worth it, and go back in and do it. Another technique you can use is to talk to someone you already know. The key is not to talk to no one you know, but not to rely on them. And hang on to them the whole time. But it's that getting into the bath analogy again. Go and talk to someone you already know. That's putting your toe in the water, and then get them to introduce you to someone they know and you don't. Because that fear of meeting strangers doesn't apply when we're introduced to that stranger by someone we trust. So if you get them to introduce you, it becomes much more comfortable because that fear of rejection disappears. So rather than relying on the person you already know as an anchor that you're just going to hang on to, think of them as a bridge to a conversation with someone you don't know, and then you can start moving between conversations in that way, and you start adjusting to the temperature of the room.
Thank you for that, Andy. Interesting that you mentioned about the relationship building and Vidusha's question on building confidence for someone who wants to, who gets into this or steps up to talk, to address, to present. On that note, and I see the book right behind you, I think, which is your third book, Connected Leadership, where it talks about beyond the confidence building. It talks about building, influence, etc. But you mentioned in there saying how the professional relationship underpin executive success. Talk to us about that. I mean, what do you mean by that?
Yes, so I mean, this takes us back to that question about networking not being about sales. And what is very heavily underestimated is the power of our networks to help us in whatever we want to achieve. So if you look at anything that you want to achieve as a business executive in your role or in your career, and you apply to that objective the support of other people, you'll very quickly see that that objective becomes more achievable. So if you, for example, want to introduce change to an organization, that becomes a lot easier if key stakeholders are on side, if they're giving you key information about what people are thinking and the right messaging and what will resonate, and if they advocate on your behalf and on behalf of that change to get the support of everyone that needs to go along with it. If we take the sales element, if you're looking to bring in new business and new opportunities to that organization, it becomes a lot easier when you have people who influence key decision makers and who talk positively about you, who develop your reputation in the marketplace. And it becomes easier when you get introduced by people who the buyer trusts in a way that makes them interested in buying from you. If you want to recruit new people, it becomes easier if you have a network of people who know the marketplace. They know the best talent and who's looking for opportunities right now, or they know the best talent who might not be looking for opportunities. They might not be on the market, but they can talk to them on your behalf and position you. And you can keep doing this with everything that an executive needs to do. It becomes easier with other people's help, and it's the same in your career. There was some research conducted at the end of the last century by Harvey Coleman, but it still holds true. And it's known as PI. And Harvey Coleman looked at the three key factors that went into promotion. And the three key factors were performance, image, and exposure. And everyone assumes that performance, how well you do your job, will be the main component, the main influencing factor on a promotion decision. But it wasn't. It accounted for 10% of promotion decisions. 30% was image. In other words, what people know about the job you do. And 60% was about exposure. Who knows about the job that you do? So if we don't have other people understanding what we do and what our qualities are and spreading that word to the right people, doesn't matter how good we are at our job, we're not going to get that promotion. So again, the objective is promotion. How can other people help? They can talk about you, they can advocate on your behalf, they can sponsor you so that you get considered and you get chosen. So when I talk about professional relationships underpinning executive success, that's what I mean. Building a network of strong relationships with people who are in a position to support you with what you want to achieve, who want to support you in what you want to achieve, and who know how to support you in what you want to achieve.
Actually, that's interesting because there was a piece of research that was done that I keep referring to when it comes to some of the programs we run as well. Well, long years ago, and I remember this from way back when I read for my bachelor's, and they said there were effective managers, well, average managers, effective managers and successful managers. And they asked the question, what was the difference between them? Well, and how did they spend their time? And back then, of course, what you term as professional relationship management wasn't even coined. And it was very much, the buzzword was networking. So what they found was that average managers spent most of their time doing traditional management. Effective managers spent most of their time doing communication. And successful managers, by definition, successful manager was someone who rose up the career ladder faster than average or faster than the others, actually spent most of their time networking. So that ties beautifully with what you were just saying. And it's true. But a little side question from this, because this gets asked quite a lot in the kind of programs we run, where young executives who are aspiring to become managers comes and asks us, you know what, when you talk about building relationships and such with, you know, your key stakeholders, is that sucking up to your boss? Is that sucking up? And sucking up is always looked upon very negatively. What's the difference? Where do you draw the line between building a professional relationship and sucking up?
I think they're completely different things. A relationship is based on mutual respect and trust. And I don't think what you term sucking up leads to mutual respect and trust. Most successful business people who I know and I respect welcome and respect constructive criticism. They want people who speak bluntly to them and honestly to them, but at the right time and in the right way. You know, a relationship based on mutual respect means you can speak openly and be honest with each other. And that's not a sucking up relationship. So therefore, I wouldn't call that a strong professional relationship at all.
From the opposite side of someone who doesn't see it, and that's actually the issue always, isn't it? Because sometimes when you're not the kind of person who would necessarily confront people openly and would rather choose to have a private conversation about your disagreement, you're always openly seen as being agreeable. And that is where I think most of the confusion happens, because someone who's looking at it from the outside, who's seeing you having that kind of a relationship with your superiors, and especially those that matter higher up in the hierarchy, well, that's when the whole sucking up equation comes in, isn't it? Because it might not be that you do it intentionally, but that's how it can be perceived. And that's what I kind of wanted to dig into, what you want to look at it from that perspective, but also because I want to hear what you have to say about how do you stop yourself from being perceived that way in a professional relationship by others. Because if you're seen to be sucking up, if you are, then it's fine, then it's perfectly fine, because you're guilty as charged. But if you're not, how do you stop people from perceiving you that way?
It's an interesting question. I think that I go back to this word respect, and I would take issue with the term confrontation, because I don't think it's about confronting people about disagreements. I think it's about two-way respectful conversations about different opinions. Ultimately, respect means that you air your differences, let's call them your different perspectives, and then you agree together a way forward. And obviously you have to respect someone's seniority as part of that as well. In terms of how you're perceived by your colleagues and your peers, I think that one of the things that comes out of a mutually respectful relationship is a bit of give and take. If you're constantly going in and challenging what your boss is looking for, you know, let's base it on the assumption that it's not the right way forward and there's general agreement it's not the right way forward, then in a respectful two-way relationship, there's going to be give and take. So you're going to be able to get some concessions. You may not get everything you're looking for, but you're going to be able to influence the way forward and show progress in what you're trying to achieve. Failing that, at the very least, you're going to be able to come back and say, I raised these issues. This is why they're going forward in this way, and to be able to come back with a much more persuasive argument that shows that you understand it better. So I think that it's about having frank and honest, respectful conversations, looking to see on both sides the other person's point of view, and then seeing how, rather than a black and white and battle of wills to see who wins, how you can pull those different perspectives to come up with a better solution for all and communicating it more effectively.
Andy, thank you for that. And I'm mindful of the time, and just before we do come into the last 10 or 5 to 10 minutes, a question with regards to all of that about building relationship and building a meaningful, trusting relationship in order to be more real rather than just to try and sell. I get that. But in your approach to organizations and in your book, Connected Leadership, and you talk about, it is important how it benefits the organization, how leaders can work together, how teams can work together if they have a more meaningful relationship. But it isn't always, it doesn't come automatically, right? I guess it doesn't just happen. Clearly, there's a lot of training, coaching that gets involved. But I'm also going to ask you, you've written a book that says, just ask. Is that something that talks about how people should go forward with it? Is there a connection between connected leadership and just ask?
There is and there isn't. So connected leadership is very much focused on, how you develop those professional relationships, looking at your career and what you're trying to achieve as an executive. And part of that, one of the chapters is leveraging the power of your relationships. And so, how do you go from, in connected leadership, there's three main areas I focus on. Building the right relationships. So are you connected to the right people? What's the mindset you take into building those relationships? And where's your balance between a very transactional strategic approach and a relationship driven approach as well? And that's all covered in the book. Then I look at nurturing the relationship, and that's very much to the point that you were saying initially in the question about, you have to take people on a journey, and I look at the 7 stages of professional relationship and moving people from someone who recognizes you to someone who advocates on your behalf, even becomes a friend. And then you've got leveraging. What holds us back? And the referral strategy, which is in my 3rd book. So Connected Leadership is my 4th. In my 3rd book, Recommended, I go into a lot more detail about that referral strategy. How do you leverage your network? In Connected Leadership, we touch on it and we look at some of the basics. With Just Ask, it's a different kind of book, and it's a related topic, but an independent one at the same time, if that makes sense. The premise of Just Ask is seeking support is your greatest strength. And behind that lies the premise that we are conditioned to look good, we're conditioned to look strong and be independent. And that means that we don't ask for help and support as often as we should. Now, that could be a very simple thing that helps you in your career or your business, which fits with connected leadership, or it could be a much bigger thing in your personal life. So within Just Ask, I interview people who have lost, had miscarriages, who have nearly died. People have come close to suicide. From the world of professional sports, we've got a former professional footballer who tried to kill himself while still playing at a high level. We've got a former world champion boxer who went off the rails when he lost his title. And we've got the business focus as well. So the business element of that book is an extension of that working in Recommended, my 3rd book, in Connected Leadership, on getting the support of your network in what you're trying to do professionally. But there's a much wider perspective of why it's important for us as individuals, as human beings, to seek the support that our networks can offer us.
Anthony is my timekeeper. That was his subtle way of saying, shut up before the time runs out and ask just one last question. So, in the respect of time and being respectful of him, I do have two questions, unfortunately. So I'll throw both at once so that you can actually take your shot at it, so to say. But I just couldn't help but ask this because I think networking does matter, and there's no argument about it. And you've taken it one step further by talking about professional relationships. And I couldn't help but ask, why is it that people who would find building relationships in their personal lives relatively easy find it difficult to build relationships in a professional sense? Was one aspect to it. And the second aspect to it was, if you are getting out of your profession, I mean, when you mean professionals, I mean, our audience have a lot of people who are just starting out in their careers, and also at senior levels, but also people who are starting out on their own for the first time. And the type of relationships you need to build in these two categories can be quite different. Can you give some input on that for them as well?
Yes, so with your first question, I think it's a really interesting one again, that I haven't been asked before. My take on it would be that you're putting too much pressure on it being a professional relationship and differentiating the way you approach it to a personal relationship. I think what works well in personal relationships to a large degree should work well with professional relationships. And we do try, or many people try and draw a line between the two. For me, the two merge and blend seamlessly. So a lot of my best friends now come through professional relationships because we have the most in common. But there are equally people who I get on very well with professionally, but we don't seep into each other's personal lives, and that's equally fine. Everyone is different. Just as with my personal relationships, I have people I talk about work with, and I have people I don't. And that's because every one of those relationships, personal or professional, is human to human. And taking away those labels of personal relationship and professional relationship allows you to engage on a human level. And if you do that, it shouldn't be any different. So my advice to people who struggle with professional relationships would be, how would you engage with this person if you met them at a dinner party? How would you engage with them if your friends introduced you? Try and engage on that level. And if you worry that the way you behave when you're with your friends isn't appropriate when you're in professional company, then look at how you behave in your life. I came to this conclusion for myself. I talk about it in Connected Leadership. I came to that conclusion a number of years ago when I realized that I wouldn't necessarily be proud if a client or a professional contact saw me in certain elements of my personal life, like at a football match. So I adjusted my behavior because I didn't like that feeling. And now it doesn't stop me having fun. It doesn't stop me letting what I have left of my hair down, but I wouldn't be embarrassed if a professional contact saw me because I'm being human. And if you're being human, people can relate to that. If people can't relate to me, then we shouldn't be having a professional relationship. It's quite simple. So it's an interesting question and probably one I'd want to sort of delve into in more depth, but hopefully that gives some food for thought on that topic. It's something I think, you could discuss it, at length, and go backwards and forwards on quite a lot. But those are my initial thoughts on it. The second question, the second part of the question, the advice for people who are in different positions. So whether you're a senior leadership or looking at the start of your career, or you're running your own business, there are obviously different needs and different areas of focus, but many of the same rules apply. And those rules are, you're looking to build relationships with people who could support you, or who you could support over the long term, not just short term. It's about relationship building, not transactional focus. And for me, that doesn't matter where you are in your career. You always follow that. Carol Stone, who was a BBC producer of Any Questions and Women's Hour, once said, make friends when you can, not when you need them. And I think that advice just counts at whatever level you're at and whatever you're trying to achieve. in all of those positions. I touched on a few minutes ago the different mindsets that you need when you're looking to build relationships, and there are some people you need to meet to achieve what you're looking for right now. So if I'm looking for a new role in a particular industry, I'm going to be looking to meet key influential people in that industry because they serve me now, but I want to maintain long-term relationships with them. So I want to be building those connections on an ongoing basis. But at the same time, I meet people I have a rapport with and I get on with and I have something in common with. And those relationships, they're the ones where we just see where it goes. Just build the relationship because you enjoy each other's company. And if one of you can help the other at some point, that's fantastic. All of those rules apply whatever stage you're at. The other rule that applies whatever stage you're at, but people can lose sight of this, is always seek the support and advice of people who have got different perspectives or experience that you lack. So that makes sense for someone at the beginning of a journey, but it's equally important for someone further down the line who have got that experience and they're giving back themselves. We're never too old or too experienced or too successful to learn something new. And the final thing I would say to that, and you may notice I'm not differentiating here because I think that all of these rules are valuable whatever stage you're at. You just may use them in different ways. But I've talked a lot about how your network can help you and support you, but it actually starts with an attitude of looking to help and support your network and not seeking a quid pro quo. It's not about reciprocity. It's about helping people because you can help them, and knowing that they would want to help you in the same way, and understanding that they'll help you and they know that you would help them if you could, and vice versa. And it's that abundance mentality across the board that really oils the cogs of a successful network.
Thank you for that. I think you're absolutely right. It doesn't have to be differentiated that way, but unfortunately, a lot of people do. And I think that makes all the difference. So thank you for that.
Well, Andy, thank you very much once again for carving out a moment in time from your undoubtedly busy schedule. So thank you for the time and for the insight. We do have another interesting personality lined up for the segment next week, so do watch our social media spaces for the links to join in. If you've missed part of this conversation, it will be up on our LinkedIn channel, so do visit, do subscribe, and hit that notification button to stay updated, and remember to share. A huge shout out to our technology partners, H1, going strong with us for our 3rd season. With this, I bid you a wonderful rest of the day. Stay safe, stay productive.